can we play last night's music again? And the answer is yes. You'll sing along with it. That's very beautiful, isn't it? I've sung that just about every night of my life now for almost 40 years. And sometimes I sing it in the course of the day. And the Litany of the Great Compassionate One is one of the shorter ones that is used a lot. It's also used when somebody dies or briefly after they have died. And it's used at a funeral ceremony. And so it's very meaningful to me, so I'm glad at least one of you enjoyed it. Now. So somebody asks about saying verses for various purposes, including gray areas. Now, what is an action with a gray area? Whoever asked me that, can you clarify that? Nobody?
I can't admit whether I asked it or not, but a gray area would be if I can't pay my rent and I don't want to go into a homeless shelter, I stay and I don't pay my landlord. That would be one. Then it would be anything to be a gray area.
Yeah.
Any sort of vice for a greater good.
That's a really good example. Yeah, thank you. Did you get that over in this corner? If you are being evicted or you can't pay the rent and you don't want to be homeless and you stay in your home, is that stealing?
Can't go to a shelter because the shelters are like full of animals. They'd kill you. So it's either you die in the shelter or you steal from the landlord, and there is no good choice.
Right.
I mean, there's other ones. There's like, I don't know. Say you need to make $10 million. Well, then you might have to go to casinos or invest in very risky things and risk losing money in order to do it. That's another gray area.
Right.
You're stealing from the institution. Same thing, credit card debt.
Right.
I may or may not have defaulted on $200,000 in credit card debt because I couldn't pay it 9 years ago.
Right.
Is that stealing? I couldn't afford it. Otherwise, it would hang over me for the rest of my life.
Yeah. Those are all very good examples of what I call having to choose between a series of lousy options. And most of life is like that. It's not always that dramatic, but most of the time, when you have to decide on an action, it's not really very clear-cut about one perfectly good solution and one absolutely bad solution. It's usually confusing. And justification is one of the more tricky skills that we have as human beings. We can justify just about anything. I can. Now you sit down and go, well, but what if? And then you come up with this really very good reason to do something. And when you decide to be serious about a spiritual practice, that has consequences that it brings with it. There is a price to pay for peace of mind. And basically that's what the teaching is about, that's what the practice is about. It's not about this is absolutely right, that's absolutely wrong. And if you do the wrong thing, some being is going to come down and condemn you. It's about your own peace of mind, your happiness. And if you do something that you really know in your heart you shouldn't be doing, then you will feel bad even if nobody finds out. Even if all of society says, no big deal, rack up a credit card debt, and then we'll just forgive it. Society might say that. Your little inner voice may not agree. And that's what the practice is about, is finding ways to live in such a way that you can live with yourself.
I can live with myself just fine.
Right. Well, then there's no problem.
but does that bar me from a spiritual practice just because I can live just fine with screwing the man?
Say that again?
Does that bar me from a spiritual practice? Because I can live just fine screwing them. Not lose a wink of sleep.
Well, that may be. That's quite possible.
And does that bar me from higher spiritual disciplines?
No, but when you start on any of those, sooner or later, something will hit you in the face. And that's not a threat. And it's not something hanging over you, but a lot of our karmic consequences that we find when we get into meditation more deeply is one day you remember something that you did which at the time you weren't even aware was wrong. You weren't even aware you were hurting somebody, or maybe you were aware but you didn't know what else to do. And now, years later, you feel it. And if you're willing to bear the karmic consequence, then that's completely up to you. If you're willing to feel that way, it's up to you. Just a minute, I'm not quite done yet. And a lot of the things we do in life are like that. You have to say, okay, here's a thing. Somebody's being attacked by somebody else. I'm present. It's not even a physical attack. It's a psychological, emotional attack. And I'm present. And I feel this isn't right. I'm going to have to do something about this. Doing nothing about it will leave me feel bad and leave one person feel bad. Doing something about it will leave me feel bad and somebody will not like me. That makes me feel bad. So there isn't a clean solution there, and you choose, and the more you meditate, the more you will learn that you make a choice, and at the moment of choice you already accept the possibly negative consequences. They may not hit you in this lifetime. You may do what you're doing and then you may die and you go, see, nothing wrong, nothing bad happened. But in Buddhism it is said, in Zen it is said that karmic consequence comes in 3 periods of time. Immediately, so you know, okay, this is because I did that. Somewhere down the road where it is harder to see what it was that caused it. And somewhere way down the road where you can't remember. And then people end up in a life situation where they say, gosh, I haven't done anything wrong, and why am I unable to pay the rent? Why does this happen to me? I've always been such a nice guy. And maybe the answer is because 3 generations back there was a person who did something. And now you find you're in reaping the consequences. And so then what are you going to do? Are you passing them along? Or are you going to change it?
I'm going to accept the exceptional fabulously intense pain
Mhm.
that I get during very long periods of meditation and endure astronomical suffering.
Yeah.
That is all I can do.
That's all you can do, and if you can do that, blessings to you. Yes.
Is there a way that we can change that karma?
We change it all the time.
Okay.
Karma is totally fluctuating. It's like a river. And every little piece of grit that you throw into the river changes it a little bit.
Okay.
So every good act that you do, every thought that you don't express, every kindness that you pay to somebody else takes a little bit of good karma. And karma comes from all kinds of different directions. And there's very personal karma, there's group karma, there's bigger group karma. Like for instance, I have in my life done what I've done and made the choices that I've taken as an individual person. But I was born with a female body. And so I'm in the large group that is called white females. And stuff happens to that group that aren't particularly personal, but they happen. As I'm getting on in life, now I'm beginning to move into the group of elderly people. They're treated differently than young people. It's nothing personal, but it happens. And so some of it is larger than you can think of. The time that you're born into, which era of history that you're born into, affects you. So those are the things. The other day I read this very interesting little research article that said, if your grandmother smoked before she was pregnant of your mother, you have a bigger chance of lung cancer. Now what can you do about that? Nothing. And your grandmother stopped smoking before she got pregnant, and yes, nevertheless, 2 generations down the line, they can still find that. And I said, great, see, their science is coming up with what meditation people already knew for centuries. Karma goes on further into time. So the thing to do is to not worry over much, not get all spastic about what karma is happening or it's not happening. Just whenever you find you can make a choice in your behavior, try and make a choice for peace. Try and make a choice for kindness. And if you have to stamp your foot, if you have to do something rough, try to do it with a gentle heart. And you won't always. That's why we're human beings. We don't always. And that is also okay. Because that's how we learn. So don't let it scare you. It's more something that can inform you in a positive way. And then you can say, oh, look at that. Now I did that and that really was painful. So I'm not going to do it again. If it wasn't so painful, you wouldn't care. Does that make sense to people? Okay. Oh yeah. It's a sports question. It's actually very good. How do I balance the paradox of living in the present and anticipating future actions? That's one of these funny things that another big misunderstanding, that living in the present means you don't make a shopping list. You don't get ready in time for meditation like I did. planning is part of living in the present when it is time to plan. If you want to eat dinner, you have to put on the potatoes a half an hour ahead of time. That is living in the present with an expectation of the future. Otherwise, nobody could live. You know, if you really only were aware of this moment, like you were saying the other day, somebody has a brain problem, a brain sickness, and doesn't remember anything that is older than 5 minutes ago. Such a person has a very difficult life. That just is very difficult. So we are aware of the past. We remember that we put a kettle on the stove. Then we went away and did something, and hopefully you'll remember that while you're doing this other thing, so that you go back and you say, yeah, that's what it is. So that all, living in the present, is a complicated thing. Really what it means is don't over much concern yourself with the past or the future. And the word over much is the key word. If you just keep rehashing a previous event, when it really is no longer helpful to do so, then you're creating a problem for yourself, and you can't really live because you keep bringing up that thing in the past. And so when you do meditation, sometimes it's good to say, that was then and this is now. I have to say that to myself regularly. That was then and this is now. And then you go on, unless there was something about the then that needs to be addressed. And then the sooner you go and address it, the more peace of mind you will have. And with the future, it's the same kind of thing. One of my favorite phrases when people start fussing about the future is, I'll say, we may not live that long. So then we'll have wasted all this time getting ready for something, and we may not be there. Some people find that annoying when I say that. I find it very actually relieving. I think, oh, okay. Which does not mean that I don't plan and I don't prepare and I don't get ready for stuff. It just means I always keep sort of here in my awareness the fact that it may not actually come to pass. Not necessarily because I die, but maybe because the weather changes or whatever, the electricity goes out or something. Somebody else gets in there before me. So the worrying over much is really about that. And yes, you make a plan. And yes, what's this example is about playing a ball to somebody. You have to throw the ball to where the person is going to be to catch it, as opposed to where they are now, because then it'll be behind them, and that's a very good example. And moving around in a room full of people or driving a car is all about that. You have to know what's going to happen and act accordingly.
I have a question.
Yeah.
What if you're rehashing a moment that brings joy?
Well, don't do it over much. It's the same thing. Because then it might get in the way of responding to what's happening. There's nothing wrong with every now and then looking at your photo album or your photo machine. There's nothing wrong with rehashing good memories. That's part of being human. When somebody has passed, everybody sits around and starts telling pleasant stories about their life. That's good, that's human, and we need it, and it helps us. And then you have to say, okay, that was then and this is now. And then you do something else. Because if you stick too much to a pleasant memory, there is the possibility that you then compare it to the disappointing now. And then you have the seed of a problem. It's like it used to be so good. Now look at me. And then you're sort of twirling down the slippery slope. Do I believe in God or angels or beings who guide us or psychic powers? Then we get into the empire. We'll leave that bit be. First of all, what I believe in is of no consequence to anybody else. It doesn't really matter if I believe in angels or gods or not. What matters is, do you? And then what do you do with that is the other thing that matters. I do think that there are beings that guide us all through our lives, and they may be a cashier at the Safeway. They may be somebody in a passing car that you never meet. They may be the parents of a friend when you were little. They may be a dog in the street who is a guide dog. You just don't know. Some people have experiences of other than human or other than tangible beings. If it leads you to the good, be happy about it. If it starts pointing you to doing unsavory things, then take another look and say, do I really need this? So it's up to the individual, really. Personally, I keep an open mind because all through history there have been stories. In all cultures there are stories of other kind of beings than humans. And there are plenty of things that we cannot see with our ordinary eyes, like bacteria in the sink, but we see the consequences. So we believe them. So keep your mind open, keep your eyes open, and keep taking responsibility for yourself, because really in the end, that's what it's about. Another person or another being or a signpost by the road, they can point you and you interpret that pointing. And that's your responsibility. You know, you get a fortune cookie and it says something. If you follow that, it's your responsibility. It's not the thing or the other person. Does that make sense? That is part of Zen practice. It's very much you are responsible. And even if I say to you, do this, that, or the other, in the end, if you do it, it's your responsibility. And it doesn't really wash to say, well, they made me. They made me. They told me to. And I was so innocent. That's for children. Zen is not for children. It's for adults. Yeah?
The psychic power part. I mean, what about... I always get in trouble. This comes up time after time. But putting into practice such intense emotional concentration. I can understand. Doesn't anything come, like ability to know the future, to feel person's feelings?
They do.
And for lay people, they can use that for strategic advantage. That would be a great area.
Well, you can use anything for any purpose. And people do. It doesn't matter what other people do. What matters is what I do. And for you, what matters is what you do. And if you have powers and you use them for unpleasant purposes, eventually you will pay for that.
I don't have powers, that's the problem.
Well, then you don't have to worry.
Yeah, you do. You have power. We all do.
If you don't have powers, you don't have to worry. If somebody else has powers, they have to worry about themselves. I think you can make it too complicated. Keep it simple. You know? They say, if you have a hammer, you see nails everywhere. If you don't have a hammer, you don't have to worry about the nails. Don't make it too complicated. How do we deal with the distraction caused by persistence of memory in meditation? And I'm going to talk about that tomorrow after breakfast. If you can wait that long. What is self-devotion? What's this one? Oh yeah. I was wondering about that. If people are coming here while everybody else is eating turkey. I was thinking, don't you have turkey at home? Thanksgiving. There are all kinds of reasons why people come to retreats. And also holidays and festival days and weddings and funerals tend to bring up the worst in families. All of those things, they just do. And so there is that dichotomy, like this is a holiday. My mother used to be terrible at that. She would get, well, my mother had problems, let me put that to start with, but then there would be a holiday coming up or even just a birthday and she would get all worked up about how we all had to be very happy and everything had to be perfect. And then of course it wasn't, and then she would be very upset and the whole thing would be awful. And up to a point, we all live with that and we work with it. And up to a further point, when you begin to meditate and learn to take a little bit of perspective, you can actually teach yourself to be more stable in difficult circumstances. I tend to compare that with watching television. If you watch the television or a movie, you can totally get sucked into it, or you can keep a little bit of a distance that says this is just a movie. And I actually used that when I went visiting my family after a number of years. Mind you, it took me a number of years, and I went visiting my family, and it's a large family, and there was all this stuff going on, and all of a sudden I thought, this is just like the TV. And that was a breakthrough moment. That was really a breakthrough moment, because I thought, I don't have to get involved. I just see it happening, and I don't have to join in, and I don't have to feel affected. I just watch it, and I smile nicely, and every now and then when I need to I say something, but I make sure that it isn't fuel on the fire. And when it gets to be too hairy, I'll go to the bathroom. And I'd go to the bathroom and sit down and put my hands together like this and wait for 5 minutes and center myself, and then I would come out again. So after 2 days of that, one of my sisters says to me, do you have a bladder infection? You're going an awful lot. And so I had to kind of manage that a little bit to not create a wrong impression. But in this process, when you yourself are changing and you yourself are not responding in the old ways, when family pushes your buttons because they know exactly where your buttons are and they like to push them, and then they like to get the appropriate response. If you begin to disconnect the wiring of your buttons, you still have them, but they don't work so much anymore. Family members might get very frustrated and they push your button even harder because they don't quite believe that they don't get a rise out of you. And that is a difficult period of time when you're changing and you know you've changed and your mother still treats you like you haven't. And then it's tempting to get angry and say, but I've changed. Over time, if a little bit more time gets by, people will actually begin to realize that you have changed. And then they can also change. And often do. So the short answer is yes, practicing will help with family relations, and also it takes time and it is difficult. But it can be done. And so I wish you all the best with that particular problem, because that's a thing. Now somebody wants to know what self-devotion is, and I don't actually know. Yeah.
I just wanted to comment on the last family.
Okay.
Is that okay?
Sure.
You know, when one member, even from a multi-generational
Mm-hmm.
perspective, when one member chooses to do what it takes to change,
Mm-hmm.
if it's spiritual practice or therapy, whatever it is, it benefits everybody.
It does.
And it's very good news.
Mm.
But we need help. I mean, either a sangha or a clinician or to do that, because energetically
It's hard.
the larger mass wants to pull you
Mm-hmm.
back.
Mm-hmm.
It's very subtle sometimes and sometimes not. But it's everyone benefits.
Yeah, it's true.
So thanks for going into more detail with
Mhm.
that.
Okay, you're welcome. Yeah.
So I was the person that wrote about self-devotion
Mm-hmm.
because you spoke about self-devotion today.
Yeah.
And about 2 days ago, I was meditating, not for as long as we are now, but
Mhm.
for like 5 minutes, and self-devotion came in my mind, and I just started writing about it.
As a word or
Yeah,
as an idea?
as a concept, as an idea.
Huh.
And so you started talking about devotion and, you know, intertwining that with discipline.
Mm-hmm.
And so I kind of wanted you to elaborate on it a little bit more, because I'm trying to find a way to be more self-devoted to myself without it being about selfishness.
Mm. Yeah.
So that's why I kind of wanted to see what your opinion was on that, because it's more of a mastery of self in order to be balanced for other people.
Yeah, I see what you mean. You remember earlier today I said we practice for self and other? And sometimes when I make a dedication of a day or of a retreat or of a period, I word it as follows, if I can remember this. I dedicate the merit of my actions for the benefit of all beings, beginning with myself and radiating out in all directions. You have to begin with yourself. And you also, by the very nature of what you're doing, are generous and are going to share. So you do need to look after yourself. You do need to eat reasonably well, you need to rest reasonably well, you dress reasonably well, you do some yoga or whatever it is, up to a reasonable point. Everybody knows people who are so self-centered that it ceases to benefit others, it's just all about them. And that's not what we're talking about. But we're also not talking about dedicating your life to everybody else's happiness without doing something to keep you in good shape. So you have to balance the two. And if you're doing something that is mildly self-destructive, then it's actually very helpful to address that by thinking, if I benefit myself and it radiates out to others, that is a good thing. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay. Well, good. That was today's crop. It's 20 to 8. Thank you very much for your thoughts and contributions.